The bell on the door jingled, letting in a gust of morning air that swirled through the tiny diner on the street corner. The smell of burnt coffee and sizzling bacon mingled into a familiar aroma, the kind that anyone who had ever visited would remember. Inside, the clatter of dishes, the chop of a knife on a cutting board, and the lively chatter of customers all blended into the noisy symphony of the morning. But amidst the vibrant sounds, there was one thing that drew everyone's attention. A young woman, her left hand wrapped in a thick white bandage, was unsteadily carrying a tray of food with her other hand. Each step was a faltering, uneven movement, as if she were fighting an invisible battle. A steaming cup of coffee trembled with the unsteady rhythm of her arm, and at any moment, you could imagine it all crashing to the old tiled floor. "Hurry up, Denise. The customers are waiting for their food. Not for you to take your sweet time," a cold voice barked from the cash register. Ross, the manager, stood with his arms crossed, a contemptuous sneer on his lips. His words were just loud enough for the whole diner to hear, a sharp knife cutting through the brief silence. A few gazes turned toward the girl, some filled with pity, others with annoyance. But no one said a word. Denise bit her lip and lowered her head. She mumbled, "Yes, I'm sorry." Her voice was lost in the noise, so small it barely existed. A strained smile appeared on her pale face, a fragile shield to hide her humiliation. She had once been the fastest server here, the one regular customers would praise by name. But now, in the eyes of Ross and some of the patrons, she was just a clumsy shadow, a burden to be mocked. The atmosphere in the diner shifted. A table of customers whispered, "Poor thing. Having to work with a broken hand. Yeah. Why can't the manager give her a break?" They shook their heads but continued to eat, as if the story had nothing to do with them. Denise heard it all. She heard the pity, the sighs, but no one offered a hand. The feeling of being transparent, of being invisible, made her throat tighten. Ross walked over to her, his voice a cruel whisper. "Try not to drop that tray. We don't want customers thinking this place only hires useless people." A look of satisfaction flashed in his eyes, not the joy of a manager, but the pleasure of someone crushing a person who was already down. Denise swallowed the tremor in her chest. She held the tray steady until she set it down on the table. The forced smile reappeared, and a breathless, "Enjoy your meal," escaped her lips. No one knew that under the tight bandage, every muscle in her hand was screaming in agony. Sometimes, the audience to scenes like this just shakes their heads and looks away. But have you ever wondered, if it were you, would you stay silent? If you've ever had to grit your teeth and endure injustice at work, you probably understand this feeling better than anyone. If so, please leave a line in the comments. You might find someone who shares your experience. The diner buzzed again with the scrape of a knife on a griddle and the stir of a spoon in a coffee cup. Denise blended back into the rhythm, but in Ross's eyes, every minor mistake was an excuse to berate her. A drop of water splashed from a coffee cup, and he scowled. "Careless again. If you can't do the job, then quit. I don't need a crippled employee." The words were a slap in the face. A few customers looked up, so shocked they put down their forks. A middle-aged man muttered, "That's just wrong." But then he, too, fell silent. No one wanted to get involved. Denise bit her lip until she tasted blood, but she forced her eyes to remain calm. In a corner of the diner, an old man with snow-white hair sat with a cup of cold black coffee. His eyes never left Denise. Every wince as she lifted a tray, every strained smile, every moment she was humiliated by Ross, he took it all in with a deep, steady gaze. People called him the old vet because of his straight posture and sharp eyes. But no one knew he was the very reason this diner still existed. Injustice doesn't always need a scream to incite outrage. A dismissive glance, a mocking smile, an attitude of contempt is enough to make someone feel erased from the world. And that was happening to Denise. right in the place that once considered her indispensable. For a moment, her eyes met the old man's. There was a quiet, unusual connection that briefly flustered her, but she quickly looked away, picked up another tray, and put on her strained smile again. If anyone has ever felt the pull of wanting to leave while being forced to stay, they would understand her loneliness. If you've been in that situation, perhaps this is a chance to share your own story in the comments. Maybe someone will find a kindred spirit, and you won't have to be silent alone anymore. And so, in a diner filled with laughter and the smell of food, a silent struggle was unfolding, with indifferent eyes, mocking words, and a secret waiting to be revealed. The boisterous laughter from Table 7 drowned out the sound of scolding. A group of factory workers, just off the night shift, their shirts stained with oil, were roaring with laughter. They paid little attention to the trembling waitress beside them. For them, breakfast was a reward after a long night with machines. Whether the girl had a broken hand or not was irrelevant. Denise set down a plate of fried eggs, her hand shaking so much the fork clinked against the edge of the table. The table kept laughing, no one noticed. The feeling of being invisible hit her hard. Some pains don't require insults. Being ignored is enough to shatter one's self-respect. Denise knew that in this place, she had gone from a trusted employee to someone anyone could pity or ignore. Ross, as usual, didn't miss his chance. "Be careful, Denise. Don't act like a broken hand is an excuse to be lazy." His voice hissed between his teeth, just loud enough for those nearby to hear. Some customers raised an eyebrow. A few shook their heads. But that was it. No one spoke up for her. Denise took a deep breath, forced a smile, and mumbled, "I'm sorry," before quickly retreating behind the counter. Sweat trickled down her temple and onto her faded apron. The pain in her bandaged hand was like 1,000 needles, but the indifferent eyes of the people around her hurt more. In the far corner, the old man with white hair was still sitting there. His eyes followed Denise's every unsteady step. Others might shake their heads or look away, but his gaze did not. It wasn't pity, nor was it contempt. It was like a mirror, reflecting every crack in her strained smile. Ross strode to the counter and slammed a notebook down on the wooden surface. Thump. "Where's the order for Table 3? Are you going to let them sit there staring at each other?" Denise flinched, almost dropping the coffee pot she was holding. She stammered, "I'll bring it right now." Ross smirked, glancing at the other customers as if showing off a victory. The customers at Table 3, 2 women in business suits, exchanged a look. One leaned in and whispered, "This is awful, forcing her to work with a hand like that." The other sighed. "What a tyrant of a manager. It's hard to watch." But then they, too, fell silent and returned to their food. They were just customers. They didn't want to get involved. Denise heard every word, her heart clenching. People felt sorry for her. They were outraged, but no one stood up. It all ended with a shake of the head and a few whispers. That silence was heavier than any insult. She went back to the counter to get the coffee, her steps trembling. The glass cups on the tray rattled. An old customer at a nearby table watched her and muttered to his friend, "She shouldn't be here. She's just getting in the way." Denise heard him. The cold words hit her like a blade. Her small shoulders tensed. But she kept walking, still forcing a smile. If anyone has ever felt invisible in a place they once belonged, they would understand this feeling. Sometimes, cruelty isn't in the curses, but in the cold glances, in the turning away of the crowd. Have you ever been in that situation? If so, please share a few lines in the comments. Maybe someone who has been through the same thing will find solace in your story. Ross walked past again, pretending to accidentally bump into Denise, making her stumble. A little water from a glass on the tray spilled, leaving a long streak on his shirt. Ross gave a thin, cruel smile and leaned close to her ear. "Clumsy again. When are you going to stop making a fool of yourself?" His voice was low, only for her to hear, but his fake smile was for everyone to see. The customers in the diner started murmuring. A young man said quietly, "Why does he keep picking on her? It's uncomfortable to watch." Another replied, "It's like he's intentionally trying to break her." Denise lowered her head, gripping the coffee pot, trying to swallow the humiliation. She wanted to scream, to fight back, but she knew if she did, she would lose everything. This job was the only thing keeping her afloat in a life filled with bills, rent, and the constant worry of tomorrow. Her cramped apartment wouldn't pay for itself. The damp, peeling walls, the tiny, rickety kitchen, they all depended on the meager wages she earned here. Quitting meant being thrown out on the street. The old man in the corner stirred his coffee, his eyes never leaving Denise. He had seen a lot of injustice in his life, but what was happening right in front of him seemed to weigh on him more heavily. The way a person could be marginalized, made to feel redundant in the very place they had given their all. It was familiar, but also painful. Denise brought the coffee to table 3 and leaned in to say quietly, "Enjoy your meal." The smile was still there, but her eyes were empty. A smile painted on like a mask, her spirit drained. The woman in the suit returned a strained smile, but her own eyes softened. Perhaps she understood something. But then, it all dissolved back into silence. Ross watched from the counter, his gaze like a predator's. He didn't need to shout to assert his power. A single glance, a smirk, was enough to make Denise tremble. The diner carried on. Customers ate, silverware clinked. Life seemed to go on unchanged. Only the young woman, silently gritting her teeth in pain, and a thoughtful old man in the corner, waiting for something no one else knew. The morning rush faded, and while the clatter of dishes had subsided, the air in the diner remained thick. The smell of old coffee and fried grease clung to her hair, her sleeves, and the back of her throat, making each breath feel heavy. Denise leaned against the edge of the counter, her white bandaged hand hovering in front of her apron. She didn't dare touch anything with it, just rested the fingertips of her good hand on the dark, water-stained wood. Ross walked by, his glance as cold as ice, cutting straight through the vulnerability she tried to hide. "Don't just stand there like a statue. Table 4 needs water." "Or did you forget again?" Denise nodded, the water pitcher clinking softly against the counter. She passed the table of factory workers from earlier. One of them was telling a story, gesturing with his hands, and his arm accidentally swept against her tray. A glass of water sloshed, spilling a long streak across the table. The man laughed it off. "Oh, sorry about that." But his eyes didn't look sorry. They held a mechanical, practiced flicker. Denise took a cloth and wiped it up. Every slight twist of her wrist sent a jolt of pain up to her elbow, a searing heat. She tilted her head. "It's okay." A phrase as light as a breath. A reassurance meant for herself. "Leave it. We'll wipe it later," the man said, already turning back to his story. She folded the cloth neatly and placed it back on the corner. Patience was the only way to keep herself from falling apart. In the far corner, the old man, the one everyone called the old vet, placed his spoon on his plate with a soft clink. He watched Denise's every move, his gaze unwavering. It wasn't a look of scrutiny or pity, but one of acknowledgement. The way she placed a glass, the way she bit her lip to swallow her pain, the way she angled her body to avoid even the slightest brush from a customer. A short break in the middle of the day found Denise in the hallway leading to the back door. The fire escape was propped open, and a cool breeze swept in, clearing the smell of grease and smoke. She leaned against the wall and closed her eyes. Under the stiff bandage, her hand was so numb it felt like it didn't belong to her anymore. The pain was no longer sharp, but a dull, persistent throb, like the buzzing of a bee. Denise noticed the things no one else did. A small piece of paper stuck under a table leg, the scuff of shoes in the kitchen, the sound of Ross laughing somewhere, a laugh that could shatter the silence with a single note. The office door was ajar. Denise could hear Ross's voice from inside, not loud, but clear enough for anyone nearby. "Leave it. I'll sign it this afternoon. Make sure you put Denise's name under procedural violation." Someone mumbled in agreement. Ross lowered his voice and chuckled. "Just follow procedure. If she questions it, show her the file. Play by the rules, and you have nothing to fear. Play by the rules." Denise squeezed her eyes shut. The phrase landed like a stone. She counted her breaths. 1, 2, 3, and opened her eyes, trying to stay calm. A part of her wanted to walk in and ask why her name was always at the top of the list, why every spill, every delay, every mistake was blamed on her. But the white bandage on her hand was like a large X across her chest, reminding her of another night. That night, the diner was dark. Denise had come back to find a small wallet she'd left behind. The hallway was dim, the light from the street sign casting long, red streaks. The office door wasn't fully closed. Inside, Ross was on the phone, his voice smug. "We were a little short this week. A few write-ups, and it's covered. That girl, she's always fumbling. If anything's missing, blame her. What's to be afraid of?" His harsh laugh bounced off the walls and into the hallway. Denise stood frozen. She didn't think. She just instinctively stepped back. The floor seemed to stretch on forever. Her hand reached for the wall for support. The door flew open. Ross appeared. His eyes were dark. "What are you doing here?" Denise stammered. I forgot my wallet." Ross looked her up and down, his gaze lingering on the future site of her bandage. "Forgot your wallet?" He stepped closer. The smell of cigarettes and cheap cologne made it hard for her to breathe. "Did you hear something?" Before she could answer, his hand shot out and grabbed her wrist, squeezing. Denise cried out. The sound was so foreign she didn't recognize it as her own. He twisted it slightly, just enough to produce a dry, cracking sound that echoed in the dark hallway. The pain blinded her, erasing the red sign outside. Ross let go and smirked. "If you're clumsy, don't hang around where you don't belong." He turned and went back inside, closing the door. Denise slid down to the cold floor, her back against the wall, cradling her injured wrist. There was no blood, just the sound of her heart hammering and a chill that stayed with her all night. The next morning, Ross handed her a stack of papers. "Sign these, your violations from last week." Denise glanced at them. Spilled water at table 6, forgot a bill, uncooperative attitude. The typewritten words were neat and uniform, leaving no room for explanation, no question of why. "If you don't sign, the reports still go into the system," Ross said, his voice just soft enough to sound like concern. "But if you sign, I can write a note about mitigating circumstances. It's for your own good." Denise took the pen. Her left hand hurt so much her signature looked like a child's scrawl. She was ashamed of her own name. From that day on, no one remembered that she had once been the most praised employee. The regulars, who used to ask after her, now walked past her as if she were a pane of glass that distorted all sound. Some would see the white bandage and nod. "Hang in there." Then they'd walk away. Others would whisper, "In this line of work, accidents happen." The words of comfort did nothing to soothe her. They were like a small bandage on a gaping wound, holding nothing together but the illusion of being cared for. In reality, nothing was being cared for. One afternoon, a young couple with a baby came in. The baby was crying inconsolably, and the mother hurriedly asked for a high chair. Denise went to the storage room. The small wooden chair was stuck in a corner, and she had to use her shoulder to pry it out. Ross appeared, his arms crossed, his eyes narrowed. "What's taking so long? That table has been waiting." Denise bit her lip. She carried the chair out, set it down, and bowed her head in a small apology. The baby stopped crying once he was securely seated. The mother smiled. "Thank you so much." Denise smiled back, a smile as thin as a thread, holding her up between the four walls. As if by accident, Ross knocked a stack of receipts from the counter to the floor. "Pick them up," he said. Denise knelt, her good hand gathering the papers. Every time she bent, her bandaged hand seemed to pull her entire body off balance. A few customers glanced over, then their eyes darted away, as quickly as one skims past a bad news story they don't want to read. It wasn't that they didn't see. It was that they didn't know what to do with what they saw. In another corner, two other waitresses stood close together, whispering. "He made her stay late to close up again last night." "Yeah, I heard they were short on cash." And whose fault is that?" "We all know whose fault that is." They cut off their conversation as soon as Ross turned around. Each went back to her own work, carefully maintaining a safe distance from the line that was visible but unnamed. The old man changed his seat, this time closer to the counter. He ordered another pot of fresh coffee, his voice slow and deliberate. When Denise brought it, he tilted his head. "Does your hand hurt a lot?" Denise was flustered, not wanting anyone to see her weakness. It's okay," he nodded, not pressing. "This coffee is a bit strong, but it's good. The person who made it is skilled." The simple compliment made Denise blink. It was strange to have someone not ask about the bandage, but also not look away as if it wasn't there. The old man pulled the cup toward him and set it down neatly. "Keep your breathing steady," he said. As if to himself, Denise bowed her head. "Yes, sir." She turned away, feeling as if someone had just placed a small, heavy stone in her hand, a stone that felt surprisingly warm. Ross leaned against the cash register, watching the scene, a corner of his mouth twitching up. "Getting friendly with the customers, are we?" Denise flinched and turned back. I was just bringing him his coffee." "Right," Ross said, drawing out the word. "Just get your work done." He leaned forward, his fingernails tapping a rhythmic beat on the wooden counter. With each passing day, the stack of violation reports in his drawer grew thicker. Denise had lost count of how many she had signed. She only knew that with each signature, she bit her tongue to keep the words from spilling out. Sometimes, she wished someone would ask a very small question. "Is this true?" Just that. But the question never came. One gloomy afternoon, a light rain fell like dust. The yellow lights inside the diner made everything look warmer than it was. Ross ordered Denise to double-check the bill for table 10. The customer said they ordered 2 servings of pancakes, not 1. Denise froze. She remembered clearly that table 10 had only ordered 1, because the man with them had said, "I'm on a diet." "I remember it was 1 serving," she said quietly. Ross raised an eyebrow. "Remember? Who's going to believe that? Go apologize to them." Denise looked over. Table 10 was in conversation. She approached, bowing slightly. "I'm sorry. There seems to have been a misunderstanding. Can I—" The man cut her off. "No, I only ordered 1. My friend is on a diet." Ross appeared instantly, his voice as smooth as honey. "Sir, I'm the manager. Please allow me to apologize for the delay. We'll discount this table for you." The man frowned. "That's not necessary." Ross smiled and turned to Denise, his voice loud enough for everyone to hear. "New employees can sometimes be a bit flustered." "She's not new," the man said, a hint of annoyance in his voice. "She's been working here for a long time." Ross waved a hand dismissively. "Ah, I mean, new, since the accident." He turned and walked away. A searing smile was left on Denise's back. The old man took a napkin and placed it on his plate, his other hand holding his coffee cup. He watched Ross over the rim of the cup, his gaze direct, unblinking. After a long moment, he set the cup down. The sound was as clear and final as a decision that had just been locked in place. On tired nights, Denise would return to her small room. The mold on the walls was like a map, each stain a story. She would unwrap the bandage, holding her wrist as if it were a small, injured bird. The slightest touch sent a wave of pain up to her shoulder. She would look at the bills stacked on her table. Rent, electricity, water. The circle of tomorrow was laid out before her, its weight already known. She thought of her mother back home, her weak voice on the phone. "Take care of yourself, dear." She hadn't told her mother about her hand. She imagined the questions, the worry, the sleepless nights. She didn't want that. She chose silence. Sometimes, silence is as heavy as a brick, propped under a bed to keep it from wobbling. The next morning, Ross handed her a new notebook. "Starting this week, you will log all your mistakes for the shift. Self-evaluation. I don't have time for it." Denise looked up. No one is forcing you to work here," Ross said with a shrug. "But if you choose to, then do it right." He turned away, tossing a final comment over his shoulder like a piece of trash. "Don't expect anyone to defend you. This diner needs people who can work, not sob stories." The words settled onto the wooden counter, spreading like a thin oil slick, colorless but with a clinging, acrid smell. Denise opened the notebook. The first page was blank. She took a breath and picked up the pen. Her left hand ached, her right hand trembled. She wrote the first line. "Today, spilled a little water at table 7. Then she crossed it out. She thought, today, did what I had to do to survive." She couldn't cross that one out. Amidst those blank pages, the old man still sat in his usual corner. He refilled his coffee from the pot himself, slowly. Each movement was as if measured. He was not a man in a hurry. The way he watched the light reflect off the table, listened to the footsteps passing by. It was as if he had memorized the rhythm of this place. He knew when it was busy, which corner was drafty. He also knew where to look to see the things others didn't. One afternoon, it was unusually slow. Denise took the opportunity to wipe down the long bench by the window. Ross walked over and placed a brown envelope on the counter, his fingers tapping. "Someone complained about your service attitude." Denise looked up. "Who?" "Anonymous," Ross said with a small smile. "They said you were slow, always looked like you were about to cry, and it created a bad experience." Denise bit her lip. She wanted to say that crying was something she did in her moldy room, not here. "Here," she only smiled. "You have to be cheerful when you work," Ross said, as if he were giving a sermon. "The customers are not obligated to tolerate your emotions." The old man put some change on his plate and stood up. He walked past, pausing for half a beat. "Her service attitude is good," he said, his voice calm, as if he were stating that it was raining. Ross gave a thin smile. "Thank you for your feedback, sir." The old man nodded and said nothing more. Denise watched him go, her heart slowing down a little. For the first time in months, a sentence from someone else had marked her existence in this place. "She is good." The evening slowly descended. The neon sign outside cast pale, cotton candy like streaks of light on the tiled floor. Denise gathered the frayed cleaning cloths and dropped them in the laundry bin. The sound of water filling the sink was like a familiar song, whose name she no longer remembered. Ross was counting the money in the drawer, flipping through the bills as if he were playing cards. "40 short," he said without looking up. Denise stopped. "I wasn't on the register today." "Did I say you were?" Ross looked up, his eyes dark. "But you did spill water at table 7, didn't you? And you took your time in the storage room when a customer needed a high chair, right? Because of you, a table left, didn't they?" Denise opened her mouth, then closed it. She understood now. Any shortage could be traced back to her. Every road could be made to lead to the narrow alley they had already set up for her. "Pay more attention next time," Ross concluded, as if tying a bow on an ugly gift. He locked the drawer and put the key in his pocket. Be on time tomorrow. The night settled in. Only a few scattered tables were left. The old man asked for his check. Denise walked over and handed him the bill. He looked at it, then at her. Have you eaten yet? Denise smiled. Yes, sir. What did you have? He asked, not out of curiosity, but as if to hear, if her voice was still clear. A sandwich, she said. He nodded. Sandwiches are good, but not enough. Take this. He pushed a paper-wrapped slice of apple pie toward her. Denise shook her head. I can't. You can, he said, his tone brief. This pie is good. He walked to the door. The bell jingled. The door closed, leaving behind the surprisingly gentle scent of baked apples amidst the smell of fried grease. Denise stood there, holding the warm package. What made her want to cry wasn't the pie. It was that someone had stayed long enough to see that she was hungry. Another morning, when Denise opened the door, Ross was already there. He handed her a thin piece of paper with a red stamp at the top. Warning. Why? For many reasons, Ross said, his voice feigning boredom. It's cumulative. Basically, not meeting expectations. Denise looked at the paper, at the formal, cold print. Can I see the owner? The question came out before she could think. Ross laughed. The owner? I'm in charge of everything here. Why would you need to see him? He pulled open a drawer. Sign it. Denise took a deep breath. Her name was once again under a line of text she hadn't written. She signed, the pen shaking with her breath. At lunch, the diner was busy again. A hot-tempered young man in a white shirt and a loose tie was trying to get a server's attention. As Denise passed with a tray, he slammed his hand on the table. Hey, I've called 3 times. Denise hurried over. I'm so sorry. Let me... He pointed at her white bandage. If you can't do the job, let someone else. The comment was a public signal. The white bandage on her hand was an excuse for anyone to yell at her. Denise nodded, took a step back, and then stepped forward again. I will serve you right now. Her voice was strangely calm. She didn't know why she was so calm at that moment. Maybe because after so many invisible cuts, a person's skin thickens in places no one can see. The old man set his cup in its saucer and watched, unblinking. Not because the scene was unusual, but because he was acknowledging a crack that had just changed shape. When a person is pushed into a corner for long enough, they learn how to stand more firmly, even if it's just by a single step. Ross appeared behind Denise, his voice smooth. Please forgive her, sir. Our employee is in the process of recovering from an accident. The young man smirked. She should recover at home. Ross smiled. Yes, we're considering that. He turned to Denise, his smile vanishing. Table 12 is waiting for a salad. Denise nodded. She walked toward the kitchen, her shoes scuffing the floor, the sound like sandpaper. Each step was a promise no one heard. I am still here. In the kitchen, the old cook was tossing a salad, his hands moving quickly. He glanced over. How's the hand? Denise smiled. It's fine. It hurts, he said. Not a question, but a statement. Did you eat the apple pie last night? Denise was surprised. Did he give it to you? She nodded. Yes, again. He watches things closely, the cook said, flipping an omelet. Not the type to just sit and drink coffee to kill time. Denise opened her mouth, then closed it. She knew that, but she hadn't dared to trust her own feelings. Trusting the wrong thing right now would be too costly. Out at the counter, Ross was talking to 2 strange men. He was smiling, speaking quietly, his hands drawing numbers in the air. One of the men glanced at the cash register, then at Denise, then at the exit. They left a few minutes later without ordering. Ross watched them go, pinching the skin at the base of his thumb. He turned back and looked at the clock. Denise walked past, delivering the salad to table 12. "Thank you," the woman said, her voice gentle. Denise gave a small nod and a smile. The afternoon drifted by. Thin threads of darkness began to fall on the tiled floor. The old man picked up his newspaper and folded it. He stood up and walked past the counter, where Ross had just put the key in his pocket. His arm paused for half a beat, as if weighing a gesture that could say a lot without a single word. He touched the edge of the counter, his hand dry and warm. "The coffee is strong today," he said, turning to Denise. "Strong, but good," Denise murmured. "Yes, sir." Her eyes, for a rare moment, didn't look away. They met his directly, and in that instant, her existence amidst the noisy crowd. The heartless reports, the white bandage and the scolding stood firm, as if someone had just placed a solid, steady surface beneath her feet. Outside, the rain began to fall again, a light drizzle. The bell on the door jingled a full, round note. Nothing in the diner changed immediately. No one suddenly stood up to say something grand. Denise continued to walk back and forth, holding glasses, setting down plates, wiping tables. Ross continued to say the things people were so used to hearing they no longer reacted. The customers continued to eat. The metal continued to clink. But amidst all that repetition, something was moving very slowly, very quietly, like the hand of a clock ticking past a mark someone had seen. And when one person sees, the invisible begins to lose its power, little by little, with every silent breath. Denise returned to her evening shift, her body exhausted, each step feeling as if she were dragging stones, the white bandage on her hand a constant reminder that she was working with only half her strength. But Ross's gaze never let up. He watched her as if her every breath were a mistake, her every slow step an excuse for humiliation. Customers would sometimes shake their heads, sometimes offer a few words of pity, but mostly they would just turn away and continue with their meals. Injustice that doesn't affect them is no reason to speak up. Denise kept smiling, a smile as thin as fragile glass, to hide it all. Inside, exhaustion and bitterness swirled together, suppressed by the fear of losing her job, the worry of the bills piled on the small table in her shabby room. A woman who had once been a beloved employee was now seen as a clumsy shadow in a busy diner, and it was the silence of the crowd that had made her invisible in the very place where she had once been indispensable. The pain in her left hand was no longer just physical. It had become a symbol of Ross's oppression. Denise remembered that night, when he had twisted her wrist in a fit of rage, the sound of bone cracking still echoing in her mind every time she tried to lift a tray with her other hand. The feeling of having someone crush a part of your body to force you into silence, to make you bear the blame for things that weren't your fault, hurt more than the wound itself. From that day on, every error in the books, every dollar missing, every customer complaint was laid at her feet. Ross knew that Denise's silence was his cheapest form of insurance, and he reveled in that power every day, with seemingly small but sharp comments, with contemptuous glances, with half-smirks that only Denise could read the cruelty in. The customers saw it, the other employees heard it, but everyone chose to look down, because everyone was afraid, and everyone had grown accustomed to the existence of a powerless person being oppressed. Denise gradually became a symbol of helplessness in everyone's eyes, a mirror reflecting a fear no one dared to confront. She heard the whispers. "She shouldn't be working here anymore. It's a shame. But what can you do? If it were me, I would have quit." All those words, whether out of pity or criticism, had one thing in common. No one offered a hand. That was what broke Denise. Not the direct insults, but the cold silence of an entire room, the indifference disguised as normalcy. Amidst the chaos, there was only one different gaze. The gaze of the old man with white hair sitting in the corner, A gaze of acknowledgement, not pity, not judgment, just watching. Denise didn't know who he was, only that his gaze made her realize she still existed, that her efforts weren't completely meaningless. But she was also afraid that if she trusted that gaze, she would shatter again when it, too, turned away like all the others. Ross continued to create his false records, forcing Denise to sign papers full of accusations, each one like another nail in the frame he was building to hang all the blame on her when the time came. Denise kept signing, because she had no choice. Each signature came with a trembling hand, with a bleeding of her self-respect, but she knew that if she didn't sign, she wouldn't have a place to stand tomorrow. The injustice wasn't just in the insults, it was in the system Ross so cleverly exploited. The black and white reports, the procedures he always claimed were by the book. And within that so-called book, she became the default guilty party, while he was the one controlling the game. Day after day, Denise continued to show up at the diner with her white bandaged hand, continuing to persevere under contemptuous gazes and cold whispers. No one knew where her pain was greater: in the damaged bones of her wrist, or in the moments she was turned into a shadow in the very place where she had once been the soul. The injustice grew thicker, layer by layer, like a wall separating her from the world, so that even when she was standing in the middle of the bustling diner, she felt completely alone in an empty room. And yet, in that emptiness, there was still one pair of eyes that never left her. One pair of eyes quietly waiting for the moment the truth would be brought to light. Denise left the diner at the end of her shift. The night had fallen, a thin mist clinging to the yellow streetlights. The cold air seeped into her clothes, making her shoulders tremble. Her white bandaged hand, hidden in her apron pocket, throbbed like a constant, unforgiving reminder. She walked down the familiar street, the warm light from other shops, and the laughter of people just getting off work feeling like a world she could no longer touch. In her mind, the image of Ross was still vivid, his face close, his voice hissing. One word, and you lose everything. This hand is just a reminder. With every step, those memories assaulted her, tormenting her in a silence no one else knew. Her old, cramped apartment was in a damp building, the four peeling walls looking as if they were about to collapse. The small table was piled with bills, rent, electricity, water, a host of invisible monsters surrounding her. She sat on the edge of her bed and unwrapped the bandage. Her wrist was swollen and red, the bruises still visible, the skin stretched tight as if screaming in pain. Denise squeezed her eyes shut, trying not to cry, but the tears came anyway, salty and hot on her cheeks. She didn't want her mother back home to know, didn't want anyone's pity, because pity wouldn't change anything. People might offer a few words of comfort, then turn away, leaving her alone with her empty room and unpaid bills. The next day, the diner was noisy again, with the clatter of silverware, customers coming and going. Denise put on her apron and forced a smile, but every step sent a jolt of pain through her hand, causing sweat to beat on the back of her neck. Ross appeared like a shadow, his eyes constantly watching, waiting for her to miss a beat so he would have an excuse to yell, "Hurry up, Denise. The customers don't have all day to watch you limp around." The words were a whip crack, making a few customers turn to look. One of them said quietly to his friend, "He's really awful." But then, like every other time, they looked down and continued to eat, ignoring it. Injustice doesn't always explode. Sometimes, it smolders like a small fire, hot enough to burn the person inside, while outsiders only see a faint light and don't care. Denise continued to clear tables, her right hand doing the work of two. Sometimes she would hear whispers. "She's always so out of it, so slow. Looks like she can't handle it." Other times, a customer would shake their head. "I feel sorry for her, but I don't understand why she stays." All those words, to Denise, only deepened the feeling that she was redundant, neutralized, as if her very existence were a burden, dragging the diner down. Ross grew more blatant. He no longer bothered to hide the fact that he was putting Denise's name on false reports, even showing them to other employees. She's careless, unprofessional. It's all here in black and white. If the owner asks, this is the proof. Denise knew she had no way to fight back. Everything was documented. Every sin layered on her shoulders. He had built a wall she couldn't climb, and every brick was labeled evidence. In those moments, the old man with white hair still sat in his usual corner. His eyes never left Denise, not for a second. He saw how Ross fabricated his stories. He saw how Denise gritted her teeth and endured. And he saw how the crowd chose to remain silent. That silence was familiar. He had seen it on the battlefield. People know an injustice, a cruelty, but they tell themselves it's not their problem, and they let it pass. But he was not the kind of man to let things pass. Denise didn't know that her every strained smile, every unsteady step with a heavy tray, every empty gaze when she was insulted, was being witnessed by someone who was silently committing every detail to memory. And the truth that the old man was beginning to piece together was slowly forming, like a storm gathering offshore, just waiting for the right moment to crash down and wash away all of Ross's lies. While Denise continued to force herself into silence, Ross reveled in his false reports and the money that disappeared from the cash drawer. But he didn't know that those calm eyes had seen everything, and that calmness wasn't indifference, but a storm holding its breath before the downpour. Denise forced herself through each day as if every shift were a grueling test, and she was always the one who failed, no matter how hard she tried. The white bandage on her hand prevented her from moving quickly, and her sleep-deprived eyes would sometimes cause her to miss a beat when setting down a plate, all of which became reasons for Ross to berate her. Once, while carrying a tray of drinks, a single drop spilled from a glass. He immediately rushed over, his voice sharp enough for the whole diner to hear. "This is why customers are leaving, because of your carelessness." All eyes turned to Denise. No one said anything, but the shakes of their heads, the frowns, all etched another mark of shame on her heart. It was a dull, aching pain, the kind that made her feel as if she had already disappeared, had become a redundant shadow in the very space that once considered her a pillar. At night, in her cramped apartment, Denise would open the self-evaluation notebook Ross had forced her to keep. Each blank page seemed to be waiting for more false accusations, and she would write, her hand trembling, "Delayed service. Spilled water. Caused customer dissatisfaction." Each sentence was like a confession from an innocent person. She would look at her shaky handwriting, tears blurring the ink. It was no longer a page. It was a verdict she was forced to sign every day. What hurt more was that she was beginning to lose faith in her own worth. When enough people tell you you're useless, when enough eyes confirm that you're a burden, you start to ask yourself, am I really like that? And in that moment, the injustice comes not just from the oppressor, but from the victim starting to believe the lie. Ross continued to play the role of the one in control. He walked through the diner with the air of a victor, his mocking laughter echoing, his sarcastic remarks as natural as breathing. He knew Denise wouldn't dare to say anything, and her silence was the sick pleasure that fed his power. Every day, he added to her file. Every day, he chipped away at her image in everyone's eyes, until she was just a quiet shadow gliding between the tables. But through it all, the old man with white hair's gaze never left her. Day after day, he sat in his corner, watching without intervening, as if he were waiting for something. There were moments when Denise was on the verge of breaking, and his gaze was the only thing that kept her from completely collapsing, a testament that someone still saw the truth, still recognized the pain she was hiding. Denise didn't know who he was, why he was always there, but sometimes, just a slight nod from him when she set down his coffee was enough to make her feel she wasn't entirely invisible. One evening, as the diner was quieting down, Denise was silently wiping the counter while Ross was doing the books. She heard him mutter, A few hundred short again. I'll definitely put it in her report tomorrow. Denise gripped the cloth, the pain in her hand so sharp she had to clench her fist to keep from crying out. She knew what he was doing, but she had no way to prove it. Her words were meaningless against a pile of reports with her own signature on them. An elaborate trap had been set, and she was the one caught in it. That night, Denise couldn't sleep. She lay there, staring at the ceiling, listening to the soft patter of rain on the tin roof, her heart aching with a sense of hopelessness. She wanted to run, but where? She wanted to scream, but who would listen? She wanted to ask for help, but who would believe her? In her despair, she remembered the old man's eyes, the eyes that had once offered a gentle, "She is good," just 3 words, but they were a fragile lifeline pulling her back from the abyss. And it was that same lifeline that was waiting to be pulled tighter, strong enough to face the real storm that was coming. The next morning, Denise arrived at the diner again, the familiar smell of burnt coffee and grease clinging to her. The diner started a new day, as if nothing had happened. But inside her, the wound was still raw, the injustice still piling up. Ross strode in with his arrogant smile, waiting for an excuse to turn her into the villain. Denise gritted her teeth and carried on, like a wounded soldier still standing on the battlefield, not because she believed she would win, but because she had no other choice. And from the corner, the old man was still there, his eyes bright in the silence, as if he had seen enough to prepare for what no one else in the diner could have imagined. That morning, the diner was busier than usual. A long line of customers, a barrage of orders, and the heat from the kitchen made the air as thick as a pressure cooker. Denise rushed between tables with one hand, the tray tilting with every step, her eyes trying to stay calm, while sweat dripped from her forehead. Ross stood at the cash register, laughing with customers, but every time Denise passed, his gaze was as sharp as a knife. "Hurry up! Do you want all the customers to leave?" he said loudly. A few customers glanced at the young woman, shook their heads, and then looked away. No one said anything more. It wasn't their business to interfere. From the corner of the diner, the old man with white hair sat, quietly stirring his coffee. His experienced eyes followed every detail, every small action, as if he were piecing together a much larger picture. He had seen enough, heard enough. For weeks, he had played the part of a regular customer, sitting and observing, letting Ross think he was just a lonely old man killing time. But in reality, he was tracing every clue of the truth. After lunch, when the crowd had thinned, the old man stood up and walked leisurely toward the hallway leading to the office. Ross was busy on the phone outside and didn't notice. The door wasn't locked. He pushed it gently and stepped inside. The desk was a mess of papers, an open ledger, and a thick stack of violation reports, all with Denise's name on them. The old man flipped through the pages, his expression grim. The same type of handwriting, the same accusations repeated over and over. Careless, slow, irresponsible. But he had been sitting here for months. He had never seen Denise make those mistakes. On the contrary, he had seen a diligence and patience few people possessed. His eyes fell on the ledger. The numbers didn't add up. The amount of money missing each week was consistent, as if someone were intentionally taking just enough to not be noticed, then blaming it all on the most overlooked server. The old man closed the ledger, his face growing heavier. This was no longer a suspicion. It was proof. That night, he stayed later than usual, long after the last customer had left. The diner was bathed in a tired yellow light. Only Ross was in the office, and Denise was quietly wiping the counter. He heard a soft laugh from the office. Ross was boasting to another man, his voice carrying through the ajar door. "This week was easy. Just a few more reports, and whatever's missing, just pin it on the girl. Everyone in this place knows she's clumsy. No one would believe her. Besides," he lowered his voice, then chuckled, "that hand of hers, I broke it myself just to keep her quiet, so she wouldn't dare open her mouth. The old man stood in the shadows, his fists clenched so tightly his knuckles were white. Those words of confession were a knife through the silence. He had heard many kinds of boasting in his life. The voice of the greedy, the voice of the deceitful, the voice of those who thought they were above it all. But Ross's voice was a disgusting mix of all three. Denise continued to wipe the tables, each small movement a way to keep herself from collapsing. She had no idea that in a dark corner, a pair of ears had heard everything. A pair of eyes had noted every detail. The old man sat there until the diner's lights went out, then he stepped quietly into the night. The cold air cut across his face, but a fire was burning inside him. He had been through war. He had seen injustice in far-off places, but now, that injustice had crept into the very home he had built, and he knew that tomorrow morning, the game would be different. The next day, he sat in his usual spot, with his usual cup of strong black coffee. But there was a small change. His back was straighter, his eyes brighter, like a man who had decided he would no longer just watch. Denise continued her shift, and Ross continued his games of humiliation. But this time, a different kind of silence hung in the corner of the diner, the silence of a storm waiting to be unleashed, a silence that would turn to thunder when the moment came. That morning, the old man sat in his usual spot, slowly stirring his coffee, his expression calm, but a storm was brewing inside him. Everything he had heard last night echoed in his mind. Ross bragging about the missing money, the fake reports, and the way he had confessed to breaking Denise's hand just to keep her quiet. To him, those words were not just evidence. They were a direct insult to the values he had held his entire life, that people should be treated with fairness, that hard work deserves respect. He had faced liars in the boardroom and cruel men on the battlefield, but he never thought such evil would creep into his own small diner, a place he had wanted to be a warm home for both customers and employees. Denise came out with a tray, her bandaged hand trembling slightly as she set a plate down at table 6. Ross stood nearby, his eyes fixed on her every move, like a predator waiting for its prey to falter. "See? Shaking again. Who wants to eat when they have to watch that?" His voice was loud enough for a few nearby tables to turn. Denise forced a smile, but her eyes were red, rimmed. The old man set his spoon down on his plate, the soft clink of metal echoing in the tense air. His eyes followed every detail, but he didn't speak yet. He knew a public strike needed to be prepared, to be certain that when it landed, the cruel man would have no way to deny it. In the afternoon, when the diner had quieted down, he left through the front door but didn't go far. He stood on the sidewalk across the street, the late afternoon sun casting a long shadow of the diner on the ground. He watched Ross go into his office and close the door, and a few minutes later, a strange man entered through the back. The door was left ajar, and this time, he could hear snippets of conversation mixed with raucous laughter. $4,000 this week. Easy as taking candy from a baby. What if you're short? Then I pin it all on the girl. I've got enough paperwork to bury her for life. Even if the owner shows up, he'll believe it. And, the dry, harsh laughter cut through the quiet, as if these men truly believed they were untouchable. The old man turned and walked slowly to his small house, each step fueling the fire in his heart. In his old living room, he laid out the papers he had managed to get, arranging them in neat piles. The fake reports, the missing money, the accidentally overheard confession, it was all there, like chess pieces ready for the final move. He sat for a long time, staring at the ceiling, his old hands clenching and unclenching. The decision was made. Tomorrow, he would not just sit and watch. Tomorrow, he would step into the middle of that room and let the truth be laid bare before all the people who had once turned away in silence. As the sky began to lighten, the diner opened its doors again, the smell of fresh coffee and baked goods filling the air. Denise quietly set up the tables, her hand still aching, her expression still strained. Ross walked in with his usual swagger, whistling, clapping another employee on the back, as if he were the one keeping this place alive. The old man also entered, his walk slow but his back straight, his eyes unusually sharp. He chose to sit in the middle of the diner, instead of his usual corner, a spot where everyone could see him. Denise was a little surprised. Ross frowned, but then he smirked. "Another coffee, old man?" The old man didn't answer, just gave a slight nod to Denise when she brought the menu. In that moment, she felt something was different, a silence that was unlike any other day. No one knew that under his old coat, he was carrying a file, each page a sharp blade, and when the time came, they would cut through the entire mask Ross had built. That morning, sunlight streamed through the glass windows, illuminating the familiar, but now heavy space. The usual sounds, a spoon clinking against a cup, the scrape of a chair, a fork tapping a plate, suddenly sounded dry and hollow, as if heralding something different. The old man was still there, but not in his usual hidden corner. He had chosen a table in the middle of the diner, where all eyes were on him. This small change was enough to make a few regulars whisper, "He changed his spot today. That's strange." Denise was a little flustered as she set down his coffee, her hands trembling, but the old man gave a reassuring nod. There was something different in his eyes, a certainty, a quiet strength that briefly calmed the storm in her heart. Ross appeared as usual, whistling, a fake smile plastered on his face. He walked to the counter and slapped a young employee on the back, making him stumble. "All right, let's get moving today. We've got a full house." His eyes fell on Denise, noticing she was slower because of her bandaged hand. His smile turned into a sneer, his voice mocking, "Try not to spill anything this time. No one wants to drink coffee that smells like antiseptic." A few forced laughs came from a customer's table, but there were also annoyed glances in his direction. Denise bit her lip and lowered her head, hiding her humiliation. It was then that the sound of a spoon tapping against a cup was heard. 1, 2, 3 times. A steady rhythm. The small sound made the entire diner fall silent. Everyone looked over. The old man stood up, his back straight, his voice clear and calm, yet loud enough to cut through all the noise. "I apologize for the interruption, but today there is a truth that needs to be told." The diner went quiet. Denise looked up, her eyes wide. Ross was momentarily startled, then he burst into a contemptuous laugh. "What's this, old man? You want to tell us another war story?" The old man didn't answer. He just placed a thick file on the cash register. The sound was soft, but it echoed in the tense silence. "My name is Harold Whitman," he said, his eyes fixed on Ross. "And I am the owner of this place." A dead silence. It was as if all the air had been sucked out of the room. A few customers gasped, whispering to each other, "He's the owner? Really?" Denise stood frozen, her hands clutching a tray as if afraid to drop it. Ross, however, laughed out loud, his voice sharp with scorn. "What kind of joke is this? A wandering old man claiming to be the owner? That's hilarious." But Harold was unmoved. He opened the file and pulled out a stack of papers. "These are the violation reports, all with Denise's name on them. Repetitive, baseless, and false. I have been observing for months, and not once has she made the mistakes written here." He pulled out a few more pages. "This is the ledger. Money has been disappearing every week. Unreported, unexplained, but numbers don't lie. And this." He paused, looking directly at Ross, his voice dropping, "is your own confession, which I heard with my own ears, that you broke your employee's hand to silence her." The whole diner gasped. A woman at a table near the door covered her mouth, her eyes wide with horror. A male customer said in a low, angry voice, "I knew he was treating her badly. I knew something was wrong." The whispers grew into a wave, crashing through the small room. Denise was trembling, tears welling in her eyes. Ross's face went pale, but he still tried to laugh. "You have no proof. Who's going to believe your ridiculous stories?" Harold raised an eyebrow. Just then, the door opened, and two police officers walked in, their voices calm but firm. "We will." The diner was stunned. Ross took a step back, his voice cracking. "Wait. You guys. There must be a mistake." One of the officers produced a pair of handcuffs, his voice cold. "We received a tip from the owner and have concrete evidence. Mr. Ross, you are under arrest for embezzlement and assault." The click of the handcuffs was dry and final, followed by an eruption of applause in the diner. Customers shot to their feet, some clapping, others just looking at each other in relief. Ross struggled, shouting his denials, but it was all meaningless. As he was being led past Denise, his eyes still held a venomous glare, but this time she didn't look down. She looked him straight in the eye, tears streaming down her face, but her lips pressed firmly together, as if a door had just been closed forever. Harold turned to Denise, his voice softening, deep but full of warmth. "You carried this place with one hand. From today on, you are not just a server. You will be the floor manager, the person everyone here will respect." Denise burst into tears, her shoulders shaking uncontrollably. A round of applause filled the room, echoing off the walls, the chairs, making the once suffocating space feel as fresh and clean as if it had just been set free. Customers bowed their heads to Harold, and some turned to smile encouragingly at Denise. She wiped her tears and held her head high, her eyes shining brighter than ever before. Harold returned to his familiar chair, took a sip of his coffee, and for the first time, a rare smile appeared on his lips. Because justice was no longer just a word, it was the truth, laid bare for all to see. The diner door closed behind Ross as he was led away, leaving a strange silence in its wake. The growling voice, the cruel taunts, were gone. In their place was the warmth of applause, of exchanged glances, of a renewed faith that had been kindled in every person who remained. Denise stood in a daze, her trembling hand on her chest, feeling as if the heavy bandage she had worn for so long had suddenly become weightless. She was no longer just the clumsy waitress with the broken arm, but a living testament to resilience and dignity. Harold sat quietly at his table in the middle of the diner, his kind eyes watching every reaction. He didn't need to explain anything more. Everyone had been a witness. The customer who usually sat in the corner called out, "I always knew she was the hardest worker here. It's about time she got some justice." Another customer nodded, adding, "We often stay silent in the face of injustice, but silence can let evil grow." Those small words spread through the diner like raindrops on dry earth, restoring a sense of faith in everyone. Denise bowed her head, her voice choked with emotion as she spoke to Harold. I never thought I would be able to hold my head high in front of everyone again without feeling ashamed." Harold set down his coffee cup, his voice deep and warm. "The truth can't be buried forever. You endured, you stood strong, and now it's time for you to be recognized." He looked her straight in the eye, as if making a promise. "Never forget. The greatest strength isn't in a shout, but in the quiet patience to overcome pain." In the following days, the diner changed. The atmosphere was lighter, the employees no longer tense with a constant fear. Denise, with the white bandage still on her hand, now walked between the tables with a newfound confidence. Her "enjoy your meal" was no longer a shield for her tears, but a statement of pride. The customers smiled at her more often, understanding that every plate of food, every cup of coffee she brought, was not just a meal, but a testament to a person who had overcome injustice. Harold continued to sit in his corner, returning to his old spot, as quiet as ever. But anyone who looked closely could see a gentle smile on his face. He didn't need to be praised, nor did he need anyone to know he was the secret CEO who had watched in silence. All he needed was peace, fairness, and the belief that people, when given a chance, will shine brightly. Denise would often look over to the corner, her eyes meeting Harold's. Few words were needed between them. A slight nod, a smile, was enough. It was their way of reminding each other that justice may come late, but it is never lost, and that even in a small diner, the truth has the power to change everything. The story ends with the smell of fresh coffee, the clinking of dishes, the lively laughter of customers and staff. But most of all, it ends in the hearts of those who witnessed it, with a simple but profound lesson: believe in justice, and never underestimate the resilience of a person who seems weak. For sometimes, they are the strongest of all, strong enough to make the entire world change its view.